The old cemetery at Tremont has held the dead since 1851, slowly climbing the slope in terraced plots. It's a steep ascent, passing scattered stones like stars in dotted distance. There's a constellation connection between them, all those degrees of separation bridging dates and names. You can look down from the top on centuries of history, with the blueberry briars and wild flowers woken up in a summer rain. It's not the kind of history heard in school. It's a quiet room like a library, ordinary tales stacked up with the epic ones. Each burial is a book on the shelf, written by chance and design over decades. There are community builders, business owners, and direct ancestors for some, teachers, farmers, miners, and soldiers, and a lot of lost children. Every stone was somebody once. These are the stories of 4 of them.
I so loved going to school and learning new things. Just after my 7th birthday, there was a day in February where the weather was so bad that school was cancelled. I was so sad not to be able to go. So I thought I would learn something on my own instead. So I committed to memory a poem that I found. I was so proud that I accomplished this that I told my mother, "Ma, I learned something if I could not go to school." And then I recited it. I am young, but I must die. In my grave I soon shall lie. Am I ready now to go, if the will of God be so? My mother, however, was not as pleased as I. She said the poem had given her a bad feeling, almost like a premonition. I was in perfect health, or so we all thought. However, I took ill that very night, and it soon became evident that I would not survive the illness. I died on March 23rd, 1866, at the age of 7 years and 1 month.
My name is David Saunders. I was the son of David and Elizabeth Saunders. In August of 1851, when I was about 16 years old, I had just started a new job doing hay. I was riding on a load of hay that was being driven by horse and wagon over rough ground. We hit a particularly large bump, and I was thrown off. When I landed, I was impaled by not just one, but 2 hay forks. I was severely injured and not expected to live. However, to the astonishment of all acquainted, including my medical attendants, I actually did recover, at least partially. Over time, I recovered enough to sit up some in a chair, and subsequently, I was even able to walk a little with crutches, but I remained enfeebled. I had always been of an industrious disposition, and just lying in bed drove me nuts. I decided to make wise use of the time and learn the use of a needle. I was successful in this endeavor and did a great amount of neat and ingenious embroidery work. I even rivaled some of the local women's handiwork. I was patient in my afflictions for nearly 14 years, putting my life in God's hands. I was fond of religious readings and gladly embraced every opportunity in my power to attend public worship. I died on May 14th, 1865, just 5 months shy of my 30th birthday. To die is to gain. I now walk pain-free with Jesus.
What is written on my mother's headstone is history that is carved in stone, but it does not really tell the full story of what happened to my family. My name is Clara Robinson, daughter of Ruby Sophia and John Robinson, and I would like to share with you what really happened to my family. In the early summer of 1860, a terrible disease called diphtheria spread rapidly through our small community. I was only a small child of about 4 at the time, and one of 8 children. My parents had experienced death before, with having lost their eldest son some time ago, but it paled in comparison to what we were about to experience that year. First, my older sister, Hannah, became ill and died on her birthday, August 7th, having just turned 11. Then another sister, Eliza, who was 6 and a half, succumbed to the illness just 3 weeks later, on August 31st. Several other family members also became ill, including my father and my 13-year-old brother, John. John died September 19th. My poor mother was so distraught in the midst of these calamities. My mother herself became ill about mid-September. My mother's body and spirit was so ravished that she did not survive the winter. She died February 12th, 1861. Leaving us 5 children behind. My father buried her here, next to the children who had died the previous year, and put their names on the same headstone. My poor father, still recovering and deep in mourning, was unable to look after us. Friends and family had to step in. My father's sister, Aunt Hannah, and her husband, Isaac Woodbury, took in my younger brother, Charles, born just a year before the tragedy struck, and my older sister, Mary Jane. Emmeline went to live with relatives in Boston. My sister, Sarah, and myself were taken in by a wonderful neighborhood couple, Susan and William Baker. But my poor little sister was just too weak. Sarah died December 3rd, 1861. They buried her next to my mother and siblings, giving a loving tribute on her headstone for our darling pet. But they neglected to put her name on the headstone. Little Sarah was only 3 years and 7 months old. I was then about 5 and had recovered from the initial illness, but my constitution had sustained a shock from which I never fully recovered, and left me with a physical debility. Despite this, the Bakers chose to adopt me and showered me with affection. Just a few years later, William Baker passed away. It is said that I became an idol of his widow's affection. I suppose having to care for me helped her during this time. 6 years later, she remarried a wonderful man named Jesse Oakes, a deacon in the church. He treated me with unabated kindness. He often said that I never deviated in the least from strict veracity, to show the slightest degree of anger or utter a word against any person. How could I, when I was shown such loving affection? I tried hard to be an admirable person and promote peace and harmony as far as I could. We had all seen too much tragedy. My birth family never came back in mortality. When my father had sufficiently recovered from his illness and mourning, he met and married Isabel Grogan, moved to Nicktaw, and had 6 more children. Aunt Hannah continued to care for Mary Jane and Charles until their adulthood. Emmeline stayed in Boston for 10 more years, but unfortunately died in 1871 at the age of only 24 after a short illness. Her remains were brought home and laid to rest here beside her mother and siblings, but her name was never put on the headstone. Then, on April 23rd, 1877, just before my 20th birthday, I too joined my mother and siblings, after a short illness of only 10 days. The Oaks placed me here, and gave me my own headstone. So, while the headstones show history that is carved in stone, there is so much more that is missing, like Sarah's name on her headstone, and the fact that my sister, Emmeline, is also here. And while my family was torn apart by that terrible disease, I believe that through the grace of God, families can be together forever, including mine.
I am a man of humble beginnings. My parents emigrated to Nova Scotia from Connecticut in the early 1760s and farmed for a living. I was born in 1794 in the Cornwallis Township and spent my early life on the family farm. It was a hard life, and there was little time or money for school. I had a keen mind and was deeply interested in education and often sought out knowledge on my own, virtually educating myself. I did take a teaching position at the age of 19. Despite having limited education, I did continue to seek knowledge, and I had a love of learning languages. In fact, by the time I was 65, I had a reading knowledge of 10 different languages. Communicating was very important to me, but more important was my faith. While my parents had been Presbyterian, I became increasingly influenced by the minister at Cornwallis, the Reverend Edward Manning. He did cause me to question many things. Throughout my life, I went through some periods of great doubt and uncertainty. In February in 1815, at the age of 20, I underwent a very deep and personal experience that profoundly changed my life. I finally found out who God was and what God wanted me to do with my life. I was baptized by immersion May 14th in 1815 and felt an immediate call to the ministry. I did begin preaching the following year. And at the time, there were no formal qualifications required for the Baptist ministry. I was formally ordained in July 17th, 1817, by a council of laymen from the Horton and Cornwallis churches, including ministers Edward Manning and Theodore Seth Harding. I preached for 55 years and held pastorates in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island. In the beginning, I only remained at the pastorates a short time and did frequently return to the Amherst area where I had set up a home and a small farm with my wife Miriam Lockhart Lowe and our 5 children. In those days, I often would teach school to supplement my meager salary so that I could look after my family. Being a lover of education and the written word, I did begin a writing career in 1825. Using the ever-growing importance of the printing press to connect with the scattered Baptist communities and to present the Baptist viewpoint. In fact, I was appointed the first editor of the Baptist Missionary Magazine of Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. This is a position I held for 6 years, and I continued for the rest of my life to regularly contribute articles to the church newspapers in the Maritimes on such topics as mission, education, the Baptist history, and temperance. Early on, I recognized the dangers of alcohol, and I advocated for total abstinence. Both personally throughout my life and through the ministry, I worked to establish some of the first temperance societies in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, starting back in 1829. As for education, I fought for the establishment of an institution of learning for my Nova Scotia Baptists, since they were excluded from the Anglican King's College in Windsor. From my position as the first vice president of the Baptist Education Society, I was able to help establish the Horton Academy in Wolfville in 1828. 10 years later, we were able to expand it to become the Queen's College, where I received an honorary degree in Doctor of Divinity. You will know this place today to be Acadia University. When the Baptist Church was established here in Tremont in 1851, I was assigned to minister in what was then known as Lower Aylesford. My first wife had passed on, so I left Amherst and devoted myself to this wonderful community. I resided in a house just down the road. It is often referred to as the Tupper House. I met and married my adored second wife, Mary Miller, in 1852. Our marriage lasted 15 years, and we weathered many tests and trials. Being a man of written expression, I felt it was my duty to write the obituaries for these fine people in this community to help them be truly remembered. What is carved in their stones does not tell the story of who they really were. After my Mary died, I did take a third wife, Betsy Knowles, who did perhaps look more after me than I her. And when I died in 1881, I was laid to rest here beside my Mary. I was so honored when the Christian Messenger published my obituary, saying, "A great man and standard bearer in Israel has fallen. Mark the perfect man, and behold the upright, for the end of that man is peace."